I would like to introduce our speakers today. I'll just introduce them one at a time as they come up. Curtis King, Senator Curtis King, is chair of the Senate Transportation Committee, and he represents citizens in the Yakima area. He also serves on the Commerce and Labor Committee and also on the Rules Committee. Please welcome Senator Curtis King here to the podium, and thank you.
Well, good morning. Thanks for the opportunity to give me a chance to talk with you today about transportation, which is something I've gotten more deeply involved with than I ever thought in my lifetime could, but that's why we're there, and I do truly find it of interest. So in this coming session, we are going to be addressing a variety of issues in regards to transportation. I'm going to be working, the ranking member in the Senate Transportation Committee is Senator Hobbs. He and I believe, have a very good relationship. He is what I would call a moderate Democrat. He's willing to sit and have a conversation and discuss the issues. And I would say the same is true in the House. Have a very good relationship with Representative Cliburn, who's the chair, and the ranking member as well, which is Representative Orcutt. So we're looking forward to those dialogues. From a transportation budget standpoint, which we will have to do this year, I would say that I foresee that as being kind of a minor issue in the fact that there aren't a lot of other revenues that are going to be coming forth that are going to allow us to do a variety of things. So it's pretty much going to be what we've done the last 2 years, which is a bare bones budget that tries to address some of the problems that need to be addressed as we move forward with transportation. So then the focus is going to be, well, is there a chance that we can have a new transportation revenue package? And depends on the given day and those kinds of things as to whether or not that's going to happen or not happen. I would tell you that we're working very diligently on trying to make that happen, because I believe that we do need we need new revenue to accomplish the things that need to be addressed in this state. But having said that, there's a lot of caveats that go with it. And the reason that I say it's important, and the example I would give you, is just a few miles out here on Highway 395, I believe it is, just outside of Pasco. We came down and toured some projects in the Tri-Cities and in Walla Walla during the interim. On the way back, we drove out about 10 miles, maybe 12 or 14, went across, turned around, and pulled over the side of the road. And you look at this 5-mile section of roadway, and what you see is veining, big pockets of veining and big cracks. And I was with the regional manager for DOT, and he says, this road should have been repaved in 2013. If we had done that 5-mile stretch in 2013, we would have taken the asphalt down 1.5 inches, and it would have cost us $3 million. They didn't have the money to do it. It didn't get done. So they reevaluated it this last summer, fall, and now they got to take it down 3 inches instead of 1.5 inches. And the price went from $3 million to $4.5 million. And I would say to you, we have these kinds of things all across our state. And then you can get into bridges, and I can tell you about a bridge in my district that last spring, the Wildcat Bridge right below Rimrock Dam, they found 2 holes in it. Now these aren't just holes in the pavement, these are holes where you can look down and you can see the creek running underneath it. That's how bad this was. Now they fixed it, but it's an old bridge and it needs to be replaced. And now the problem, they will not allow people to walk across the bridge on the sides because the sides are starting to cave off, and they're afraid that it wouldn't hold that weight. But we still have trucks and cars going across it every day. So these are the challenges that we have, and that's why I think we got to find a way to get there. But when you start to address a new revenue for a transportation package, I would say to you that we got to really take this package and solve the problems that we have. Not peanut butter it all across every issue that comes up. We got to be focused on where we're going to use that money so that it's a minimal amount of money and we're going to get the biggest bang for it. So I would say that we have to definitely look at more money for maintenance and preservation. You go back to 03 and 05, we passed a nickel package in 03, a 9.5-cent increase in 05. Little to none of that money went to maintenance and preservation. And every time DOT has a problem, the first place they look is, well, to solve that problem, we need 10 million here or 5 million here. We'll take it out of preservation to cover that problem. And so we haven't done the job in maintaining and preserving what we already have, and we need to do that. We need to look at and cover the shortfalls in our ferry system. We've had shortfalls in operations. When I got there in 08, we were saying, well, we want to try and get the ferry system and the people that use it and pay for it to pay for 100% of the maintenance and operations of the ferry system. We're at about 70% right now. And in case I run out of time, I would tell you, we expect the ferry system and the riders of the ferry system to pay 70%. But when you come to transit over here, we don't expect them to pay 70% of the maintenance and operation. They're lucky if they pay 25%. In a lot of cases, it isn't even 15%. And tell me how that's equitable. I don't believe it is. But we have to address the ferry system and cover those shortfalls. We also have shortfalls in the operation of the State Patrol, and we have to address those. Not only capital and capital as well in the ferry system, but we have to address those problems to make sure that they're not creating a bigger problem for us as we move down the road. And I would say to you that we have to make sure that our state patrolmen are competitive wage-wise, because we have a problem there right now. They've gotten an agreement on a wage increase in this last interim, but I still don't think it's enough to make them competitive. Now, whether you say, well, you know, the policemen in Seattle or Spokane or wherever are just being paid too much, doesn't matter. If we're going to have a truly first-class state patrol, we got to pay those individuals so that we can maintain the number of state patrolmen that we need to do the job that needs to be done. So as we look at this revenue package, I would say that we have to again look at how do we spend this money. And I would say to you that we need to look at projects that are of economic significance to the state of Washington. Now, when I say that, I'm not talking about the project. I'm talking about the economic development that's going to happen because we've improved that interchange, or we have allowed access to thousands of acres of land that really didn't have good access before. And if we do that, I would say to you the return to the state of Washington is going to be much, much greater than what we're asking in our reforms, and I'll get to that hopefully in a minute or two, to address those issues and to help the state move forward. And I would give you 4 examples. So as we looked at concentrating our projects on those that are of economic significance, I would say we looked at 4 of the 56 that we had in the last package that we rolled out. We picked 4 of them. And so we said, well, let's look at 124th and the 520, the interchange at 148th and 520, which is over in the Bellevue area. Let's look at Red Mountain, which is just down the road from here. And let's look at SR 9, and I believe it's SR 524. So we analyzed those four, and we said, and it was given to us that the economic development that would be derived from improving those and doing those projects was like 2.4, got to find the number, $2.48 billion over the next 10 years. So if you do those four projects, the economic development that will occur around those projects is $2.4 billion. So as with one of our reforms, we said, well, we want the sales tax off of a highway project to come back to the state, come back to transportation, not go to the general fund. It's highway money, should be used for highways. I don't care whether you collect it, and why is the state collecting sales tax on their own projects? But they do. Now, we have to do that because if we don't, the feds won't allow us to collect sales tax on the monies that they give us to help with projects. So we can do it, but it needs to come back to transportation. And what we've heard is, oh, we can't do that. You're going to devastate education. We got to have the money for McCleary. So we said, okay, well, we'll move that out. So any existing projects won't occur until 2019. And so by 2018, we have to have McCleary funded and all of that taken care of. So we'll move it out beyond that. And beyond that, we're talking about $30 million a year. So you're telling me McCleary is $3 or $4 billion, and you're going to tell me that because we're not going to give you $30 million a year, it's going to devastate our ability to fund education. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but that was the argument. So now you go back and look at these four projects, again, 4 projects out of 56, and I would tell you that that economic development that occurs there is going to generate over $200 million in sales tax back to the state coffers, the general fund, and it will generate over $100 million over the next 10 years of property tax improvement. And all of that has to go to education. So if you take that 4, now we were very selective on the 4. We didn't just pick any little marginal thing. We picked some really good ones. But the point is, you now have 52 others out there that are going to have a similar kind of result. And it will improve the economy of the state of Washington, and we'll be able to fund and do a lot of the things that we wouldn't otherwise be able to do. Now, I'm running out of time, so I will tell you that we have a lot of reforms. We have to get after labor. Labor is looking at if the ST3, which was referenced, that funding goes through, that's $9 billion of additional funding. You throw in the projects and we're looking at another $7 billion over the next 10 or 12 years. That's $16 billion that labor is going to be able to take advantage of. They need to have some skin in this game. And so we're asking them for a change on prevailing wage, which I think is fair and reasonable. Those are the things that we have to do to make this package work. I could go on, but I'll stop here, and after my colleague gets through, we will take some questions. Thank you very much.
Green button? On the side. There we go. Morning, everyone, and thank you, Senator King. So I'm going to try to give you a kind of quick overview of what's going on at the federal level. I'll start with a kind of a 30,000-foot view of sort of where we're getting, where we're seeing money go to highways and transit projects, how those shares break down, and then how people are using those systems. I'll go on to talk about some sort of artificial cost drivers thanks to federal legislation. I'll give some recommendations about the forthcoming highway bill that we expect to see this year, if we are to believe Congress, and then close with some takeaways for states. So Okay, so that top left chart right there, this gives the breakdown of government spending by level of government in the United States. You can see that about 25% of transportation expenditures are coming from the feds, about 40% from the states, and then 36% from locals. Now, how that money breaks down in terms of going to highways or transit, for both the feds and the states, that's about 20% for transit, about 80% for highways. At the local level, transit shares doubled to about 40%. Now, if you look over here, probably should have made that bigger, but basically what it says, these are modal shares of commute trips going back to 1980, 1990, 2000, 2010. That top arrow is the share of drive alone. And in 1980, that was just below 65%, and in 1980, transit was over 6%. Fast forward to 2010, we've seen transit share decline to under 5%, and drive alone rise to over 75%. Now, go back to those two charts on the left there. The takeaway here is that we are currently spending 25% of total transportation dollars in the U.S. on a mode that accounts for less than 5% of trips, of commute trips. That's, I think, an obvious problem. Now, as for some of the artificial cost drivers, I think start with the Davis-Bacon Act. This is a pretty unsavory act with a pretty deplorable history. The purpose of this, when it was enacted back in the early 30s, this was in the middle of the Great Migration of African Americans leaving the Jim Crow South, moving north. The purpose was to disadvantage these African American migrant workers relative to their white laborer counterparts. And what Davis-Bacon does, this is a federal prevailing wage requirement, and it requires that federal contractors pay this local prevailing wage as determined by the Department of Labor's wage and hour division. Now, what we've found is that the unions have figured out how to sort of game this, and it turns out that the prevailing wage in a lot of places is essentially the union wage. Now, part of that problem, what the unions have done is there's a number of things, but they're very good at filling out these surveys to the Department of Labor, and that establishes that's how the Department of Labor determines what the prevailing wage is through this survey data, and they make sure that every survey is sent back. But they're very good at the system, and we end up with construction cost increases for transportation projects in the order of around 10%. Another artificial cost driver is the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, and this goes back to January 1st, 1970. We signed this in. This mandated for the first time that federal projects consider environmental impacts. They had to document that analysis and then give the public a chance to comment on that. So in the same way that the unions have figured out how to work with Davis-Bacon, the environmental left and then the people who are generally opposed to a building in their backyard have figured out how to manipulate the NEPA process, and what they've done is delay and halt projects all over the country for no very good reason. So by 2011, the average environmental review for a major transportation project took 8 years. That's just doing the environmental review. No ground has been broken, but over it went up to 8 years from 3.5 years and only a decade. So we can see that NEPA can be very, very costly, and it doesn't take all that much time for federal bureaucrats and members of Congress to really keep mucking up the process, and that's exactly what they've done. It's estimated that this increases construction costs for transportation projects by 4 to 8%, but this sort of the NEPA mindset doesn't really end with the feds, because states have mini NEPAs, or many states have mini NEPAs. Washington's State Environmental Policy Act, or SEPA, is one of the better examples, or worse examples, if you want to look at it that way. And this adds further complexities. But one of the things about the state mini NEPAs, what that kind of did in changing the dynamic between those who are looking to build projects and those who had to live there, was previously, so until the 1970s, if you wanted to build a project, and you met all the requirements contained in zoning and building codes or whatever local ordinances right there, well, you are free to build. Now, even if you meet every one of those requirements to the T, you still have to go through this mini NEPA process, environmental review, and you don't know if your project is going to get approved or not. So it really, the 1970s were a huge departure from basic property rights and sort of nuisance sort of mitigation policies that we had in the books for a number of years. So back to the feds. So this year Congress is to take up a multi-year surface transportation reauthorization bill. We don't know what that'll look like, if that's going to be 4 years, 5 years, or if they do what they did in 2012, which was basically they called it a reauthorization, but it was really a long extension of existing policy, and they did that for 28 months. So we don't really know what we're seeing yet, but one thing we do know is that over the past 10 years, the Federal Highway Trust Fund has been bailed out to the tune of over $50 billion. That's about 10% of total expenditures during that time flowing out of the trust fund. And an interesting effect is that many of you are probably familiar with the donor-donee state dynamic, where in the past, this was particularly in the 1990s, this was a very big deal, but you would have states who would send much more to Washington, D.C. than they would get back in trust fund revenue. Well, that's no longer the case. Thanks to these bailouts, every state is now receiving back from Washington, D.C. more than they send up in fuel taxes. Part of the, an issue there is that we don't have the traditional devolution, take the federal programs, let the states figure this all out that we used to have, in part because people aren't getting disenfranchised, at least in the same way, to the same extent that they were when we still have that donor-donee state dynamic. But even with these bailouts, setting those aside, the federal role is stagnating, and this is really continuing a longer-term trend that really began in the 1980s. This chart right here, you can sort of see that gap widening in the mid-'80s as they started to wind down the initial construction of the interstate highway system. This we expect to continue. I don't see the federal government in this reauthorization, or 5 years from now, 6 years from now, if we have another reauthorization, dramatically increasing the fuel tax and thus dramatically increasing the amount of revenues that they can dole out of the trust fund. So I think states are going to face a larger burden than they may have faced in the past, particularly given that we're going to have to start reconstructing some of these interstate segments that we built in the initial construction phase decades ago. So I've got a few recommendations to what we should see in the highway bill. Some are more likely than others. I'll admit to that. One, and this is endorsed by the White House, it's ending the current federal prohibition on states tolling their own interstate segments. Now, MAP 21, the previous bill from 2012, loosened that to some degree, but states are still not able to toll for reconstruction purposes. And I think this is a missed opportunity. It denies states the ability to experiment with different funding and financing solutions. And I think this is a big one, and it is currently endorsed by the White House. But really what I think we should be doing, and we should always think about, is adhering to a strict user pays, user benefits system. As Senator King pointed out, if we're paying this money for transportation purposes, it should be used for transportation purposes. If highway users are paying taxes or fees that are associated with their highway use, that money should be going back into those projects to benefit them. And we really should be ending these highway trust fund bailouts. I'll point out that in the last highway bill reauthorization, there was a non-binding motion to instruct on the House floor that basically said we would not spend more money than we're projected to bring in. That got 82 votes. And it didn't bind anyone to anything. That was not law. That was just sort of to be a sense of the chamber, which was very disappointing. I think one of the problems, and we've heard about streetcars and all these other gimmicky transit projects, is that a lot of this is flowing out of these so-called competitive grants programs. Really, they're not competitive. You have to meet certain criteria, but those criteria are politically determined, and you end up with a bunch of really, really dumb projects. Tiger, for instance, we've had several Tiger rounds. It's frequently the case when you'll see a third of those disbursements going to these streetcar projects, bringing back trolleys, stepping into yesteryear. I'm waiting for them to authorize some horse car projects. I think that's we could see that maybe in the next reauthorization. But really, so end those. Go back to just straight formula funding. It's dumb funding. It's not, you don't get to pick the shiny new projects, but it's the best way to sort of restrain the kind of waste that we've been seeing in recent years. And then going back to NEPA, we did get some reforms in MAP 21. Really, what some of the major ones with respect to NEPA, we're expanding the mandated categorical exclusion to more project types. The big one being that operational right-of-ways basically have blanket CEs now. So if you want to add, say, a hot lane or express toll lane adjacent to existing general purpose lanes right now, you don't have to go through some 8-year NEPA process to get that approved to make sure you're not adding a few feet of pavement isn't going to destroy the environment there. I mean, that's pretty obvious. But there's more things that we could do, expand this to more project types, and really help speed up the process and speed project delivery. So, what does this all mean for the states? It could mean a lot of different things, but I think it means that with the federal share declining, and I expect it will continue to decline, states have and will continue to take the lead in transportation decisions. I think states, they know what's going on the ground. They're there. They're not bureaucrats or congressional staff sitting in Washington. And I think we're going to see more of that. But this presents some opportunities and challenges. Like I said, I think we need to empower the states to make their decisions, and we can do all sorts of things in the future. We're going to be seeing in the next 10 years, you're going to be seeing a lot more things related to intelligent transportation systems, so connected vehicle technology, automated vehicle technology, things like that could profoundly change the way we kind of look at the automobile and sort of get around. So, I think states are best equipped to deal with that as opposed to Federal Highway Administration or Congress. But there are some challenges. This really means states are going to have to get their houses in order and continue, and they've been going down that trend, at least many have, but we need to keep going in that direction. It isn't going to be easy. You need to really identify, the high value, lower cost projects, as sort of Senator King was talking about, these projects that actually do have economic significance and can actually benefit people, unlike, say, streetcars. So like I said, I think states are up to the challenge here, but we need to let them make their own decisions. If we don't, if we keep these things like the federal tolling ban in place, if we don't allow states to experiment with new technologies and revenue sources, we're going to see, what's happened in Washington, D.C. spread across the country, and I don't think anyone really wants to see that. So to close, I'll just leave you with this, and I've kind of alluded to this, but I just want to drive it home. So with greater autonomy comes greater responsibility, and this really goes for the policymakers in the states, that these highway user dollar diversions to transit and things like that we've seen for many, many years. In a lot of these cases, some of these projects have been funded with a lot of federal money, such as through those grants programs. They're not going to be able to say that this is free federal money anymore if these programs really don't exist or at a much smaller scale. So this really does require a lot of discipline from state houses, state legislatures, and I think you guys are in a great position to put that pressure on them to make sure this gets done. So with that, I look forward to any questions, and thank you very much.